Continuing our discussion with file IO, and we're going to be talking about specifically how do you deal with text files, not delimited text files, but just plain text files. So to do that, I like to do an illustration, sort of what a text file looks like. You have a container that's got strings in it, and the strings are on different lines, and those lines are separated by end-of-line characters, which, as we know from our fprintf and sprintf, have the \n at the end of them. Okay. Now, when accessing a file, and you really gain appreciation for what XLS read and DLM read and CSV read are doing, because they're doing a lot of this that I'm getting ready to show you automatically. One of the things they do automatically is they open the file, and so you do fopen. You give it a file name, some file name, and usually it's .text, and then a comma, and then you tell it for reading the file, and that's what we're doing right now. We're worried about reading files. You put an R in here if you're reading the file, and what that does is return to you a file handle. And the file handle is a thing that MATLAB uses to identify and make changes and work with files while you're running a script or a function. And so that file handle becomes how you refer to the file in your program. Okay? The next thing you do is you sort of move through the file. And also, before we get to that, when you do an fopen, not only do you get a file handle, but you get a pointer that sits out there and is pointing to the first line in the file. Okay, and that's going to become very helpful to keep track of where you are in the file. And so the next thing you do is you execute this command fgetl, and you give it the file handle. And what that does is get the line that that pointer is pointing at. Okay, so it goes to the first time, and then it returns the string. It puts the line value in a string. Okay. Now there are actually two functions that do that. There's fgetl, and what fgetl does is it gets the line, but does not get the return character at the end of the line. Okay, it doesn't get the new line character in the line. If you implement fgets on the file handle, it will get the line and the new line character at the end of the line. And there are different reasons why you would want to do that, but let's just stick with fgetl right now and deal with the text that's being that comes back. When fgets does this does its work, it will get you the line and the new line character. Fgetl just gets you the line itself. But every time this executes, it returns the value of this line, and then, very important, it increments or takes the pointer and makes it point to the next line in the file. Okay? So if you did this successively, you would be able to read each line in the file. If you iterated and did this over and over again, you would get. So now enters either a while loop or a for loop to iterate. Well, which one do you use? Well, you don't know how many lines are in the file, and there's really not a good way to determine that. So what you do is you use the while loop. We'll watch this work here. So we use a while loop because, remember, a for loop, you have to set it up to know how many things are in the loop. Use this while loop, and then what you do is you ask, is the line of type char? That's what is_char does. It looks at what you put in here, and if it's of type char, then this is true. If it's not of type char, then it's false. Okay? So the way fgetl and fgets work is, let's move this pointer back up here, is it returns that line. Now, if there is something in the file on that line, it will be a string. It will be of type string, and you'll get of type line. The other alternative, if there's nothing in the file or you get to the end of the file, this function will return a -1. And when it returns a -1 is not of type char, it's of type double, and so this while loop will fail. And so that's how we're going to iterate through this loop. We're going to keep going until fgetl returns a value that is not a character. In this case, it will be -1. And so the work that I want to do inside the loop this time is simply do an fprintf, and print a string, and fill that string with whatever gets returned by fgetL and gets put in the line. Okay? And then now I have to move down to the next line every time in my loop. So I'll come back in here and say line equals, and at this time, for this example, I'll use I'll use fgetL, FH. Okay? And so what happens is I come in, I get the first line, I pass the test here in the while condition, and then I print that line, and then I move to the next line and get the next line. And then my pointer moves down one, right? And then I start over again, and I print that, I check to see if that's got characters in it, then I print that line, then I move down to the next one and get the next line. And I check that one to see if it's got characters in it, and then I print that, and I keep doing this until my pointer gets down here. And now when I go back up, my pointer is going to be, my line is going to get the value -1. So when I go back up here, it's going to ask, is that char? It's not. So it's going to exit this loop. And then there's one more thing that I need to do. I mean, I can do other stuff, but there's one more thing that I have to do, is I have to close the file. And I do that using fclose. You don't want to leave the file open. That's just asking for trouble to happen. So I close using the file handle. Okay, and so now let's look at this thing, this piece of code work in MATLAB. Over here, as you can see, I've got my text file over here. I call it invictus.txt, and it has the last verse of William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus. And then, so I brought the workspace down here on top between the editor and the command window so that we can see things happen as we go through, and I can keep it all in one window here. Okay, so I go in here and I execute. Let me go set this back up again. There we go. I execute. If you notice, when I execute here on line 7, my file handle gets assigned 4. We don't ever have to worry what that value is. Just use whatever MATLAB gives you. That's internal to MATLAB. Then on line 8, you can see the variable line gets assigned using fgetL. It gets assigned to the first line in the file. It matters not how straight the gate. So it actually gets assigned that whole line, which is of type char. And so you go on line 9 and you say, is this of type char? Yes, it is. So I can execute what's inside the loop. Then I do an fprintf. And let me, gosh, I want to take that out. I don't know if it's going to allow me to do that. But I do an fprintf on line 10. And I don't want to put the new line characters because I want you to see what happens with fgetL. And so when I do that, it's too late. Shit. Okay, so go back to so here. Let's see. All right. Okay, so okay, so now we're going to run this in MATLAB. You see me, I put my break on line 7. You look over here. Here is the poem, the last verse of the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. So that's the text file. I got it in the file invictus.txt. It's over here. And here's the code that we did on the board. So let's step through and see what happens. I step through. My file handle gets assigned the value 5, which is fine. It's an internal thing to MATLAB, so we never really have to worry about that. Just use the file handle that gets returned, the variable that gets returned. On line 8, gets executed. You notice that we do an fgetL, so we're not going to get the character turned into the line. And so the value line, if you look down here, now has the value. It matters not how straight the gate. It has the whole string, which with the comma on the end. And so the comma's on the end, so it got everything on that line. Next line, I do a while. If you check here down in the workspace, the value is char. The class is char. It's type char. So therefore, it passes the test on line 9, enters the loop on line 10, does some work. It prints that line to the screen using our fprintf construction with the %s here and the variable line. Now I use fgetL on line 11 with the file handle address to get the next line. And so now if you look, the value of line is changed to the value of line 2, how charged with punishment to scroll, and the period at the end. So it's gotten all of that. It is still of type char. So when I execute again, I go to line 9, and I check. It is a type char, so I will go into the loop, line 10 again. We'll print. Then I'll get the next line at line 11. Notice that there is no line break happening here, and that's because fgetL is not getting that line break that's at the end inside the text file. So it's just going with raw text. Excuse me, it's just going with taking this text straight across. Okay, so then I execute again, and then so line now equals I am the master of my fate. That is of type char. So I pass the test. I do fprintf on line 10. You see no carriage return. It's doing the wrap, but it's not really doing the carriage return or the new line character. And so on line 11, I get I am the captain of my soul. I go back up. That is of type char. I print that out. You see that happen in the command window. I get the next line, William Ernest Henley. I go back up. That is of type char. I print that out. That happens in the command window. I get the next line, and now you notice I'm at the end of the file, and so it returns the value -1, which is of type double. So I'm going to fail the test here on line 9, and then jump to line 13, and close the file. Okay, so that's how it works with fgetL. Now, depending on what I want to format, I could have. Let me go through here and remove the break. I could have come in here and done a \n on my fprintf, and that would have inserted my own formatting, my own end of line character. And so if I run that, you notice I have everything on one line. Okay, but fgetL is not getting that character out of the file. So let's look at fgetS, so we can see it do its thing, because it can be a little quirky in the sense that it's going to, because different editors save things in different ways, and you've seen this with changing text files from different editors that you may have, because the formatting is done in different ways, it may or may not look like it does exactly here. In other words, there may be one, there may be two, depending on the editor, line breaks that MATLAB might interpret 1 or 2 line breaks at the end of each line, and not just one, which is what we see here. So if I run this, what you see is you see a double line break here. And that's just because MATLAB is interpreting what's inside this text file, that particular formatting, as a double line break. So if you really want to be sure, you can do the fgetL and just get the text off the line and then insert your own end of line character or formatting. But if you want to go ahead and use what they have, fgetS actually pulls the end of line character out of the file and has used it here. And it looks like it's interpreted 2 end of line characters. Okay, so that's the introduction to how you read text files and how you need to use fopen, fgetL, or fgetS and close the file. And using it with the while loop with this construct is a very good way to get down the file. Next, we're going to look at a way not to just get down, not to just read each line in the file, but also read each quote-unquote word in the file, and we'll talk about that in the next video. So in the last video, we talked about reading text one line at a time. This time, I want to talk about reading what we call tokens. And what tokens are is they're the strings between whatever delimiter you may have, okay? And so we usually think of them as words, because usually we'll come in here and let's say if our text is "it matters not how," and just leave it at that for now. So if our delimiter happens to be these spaces here and here and here and at the end, then the token are what we call words, right? Now, if there's a punctuation, usually in English, our punctuations are right up against the last letter. So what will happen is this will be a whole token as well. Okay, so this is why we don't call them words, we call them tokens, because a lot of times we'll get a comma or a period or something as well. But for the most part, if you say your delimiter, which the default is your delimiter are the spaces, then your token is going to be the words approximately. You could you can change the token. We're not going to do that here right now, but you could change the token to be, I don't know, the letter T. In that case, then excuse me, you can change the delimiter to be like the letter T. So in that case, in this particular string, what would happen is your words or your tokens would be here, here, all the way from here to here, and from that space all the way to the end. So you can see how you can do some interesting things by changing the delimiter. But for the most part, what we're going to do when we read our files is our delimiter is going to be the string, excuse me, the space. And by it being the space, we're going to get mostly words. Some words will have punctuations at the end. So that's the idea of the token. So now with that idea in mind, let's look at a file here. And I'm going to just look at it generically. Now, last time we looked at getting the whole line and reading the whole line. This time we're going to look at reading the tokens that are in a line. And so I'm going to sort of, for illustration purposes, sort of break these lines up into these squiggly things, but each one of these representing a token. Okay? And once again, of course, each line will have an end of line character or new line character at the end of it. So these are now representing each individual little squiggly here is representing a token. Okay? And I'm considering that my delimiter is a space here. So now if I wanted to get to that, that's a little bit different piece of code, and we have to invoke a function. We're going to do something that's sort of interesting here. So the code's going to go like this. We're going to come back and do like we did before. We first of all have to open the file, so we'll go fopen, and then whatever file name we have here, .txt, and we are still going to open it to read it because we're still reading here. And we're going to get a file handle for that. So that's like we did last time. Then the first thing we have to do before we get the tokens is we have to do what we did before and get the line. So the line is going to equal f, and we'll use fgetL here on the file handle. Okay, so that's what we just did in the previous video. Then we're going to come in with our while loop, and while the line is of type char, we're going to go down each line. So that's going to set up, and I'm going to put an end down here. In fact, let me give myself a little bit more space. I'm going to put an end down here. That's going to end my while loop, and then after that, I'm going to fclose. So structurally, this looks just like what we just did. Now, what's going to be a bit different is the work we do in here. Keep in mind, last time the work that we did was an fprintf, and we just did this number here, and we just printed the line out. Okay, that was the work we did, and then to increment down the file, to move our pointer down the file, we used, once again, line equals fgetL on the file handle. Okay, this part's going to remain the same. The only part that's going to be different is the work that we do in here, because now we're not just printing out a line. Now we have to go down each line and get the tokens in that line. So let's think about what we're doing here, because this introduces a very interesting programming concept that you're going to see a lot. So what happens is our while loop, this while loop here, is helping us get down each line, as we saw before. Well, we need something that's going to help us get across each line and get to each token. Okay, and that's iterative too. That's repetitive too. So we're going to actually use another while loop, and I'm going to write this one in purple here. We need another while loop. So this is a while loop inside of a while loop. That's called, and I'll write it over here, that's called, those two loops are nested. So those are nested loops. One is inside the other. It's nested inside the other. And so this while loop inside here, the while loop in purple, is actually going to be the while loop that helps get us down excuse me, that gets us across and takes each line and gets every token out of each line. And so we set up this and we say while is not, and so this says while not is empty, or while it is not empty. So while line is not empty, we're going to do something with it. Okay, right? So and then this will have an end here too. Okay. Now what we have to do is invoke a function that we haven't seen before, and this function is why this works. So I'm actually going to take this function and in fact I'll shrink my file here so I can blow this function up down here at the bottom and explain it a little bit better. So this function, which I'll do in purple here, is called strtok, right? It stands for string token, and it does some very interesting stuff. What it does is it takes in a string, right? And it takes in the delimiter that you want. If you don't give it one, it's going to default to space. Okay, so we probably won't give it one because that's what most of our files are going to do, but it's going to default to space. Okay, what it's going to return is it's going to return the first string, the first token in that string. So it's going to return the first token in the string, and then it's going to give you the rest of the string. Okay, so it's going to return the first token here, so first token, and then it's going to give you the rest of the string. Okay, so in this case, when it goes, if it gets this first line here, then when it hits, and I'm going to put this in here, I'm going to put token, and it'll be clearer in the code in MATLAB, and then I'll put line equals strtok on that line. Okay, so what's going to happen here, and once again we're assuming the delimiter is a space. If not, then we have to change this. So what's going to happen here on this line, and then again we'll see it in MATLAB, is every time you execute this line, it's going to get the first token, and what it does is it removes the first token and gives you the rest of the line. So it's going to give you the first token on the string and the rest of the line. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do an fprintf, and we're just going to print out that token. And I'm actually going to put a line break there too. And we're going to give it the token. Okay? And then we do that, we go back up to the top. Now keep in mind, line is one token shorter. And so line is getting shorter every time. And then we go through here and we give it that line again, and then it takes the first token off and gives us the rest of the line. And so line is one line shorter. So what would happen is our first time through, if our outside loop, line is this whole line. Then I go into my inside loop. The first time through, I check to see if that line's not empty. And it's not. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 tokens in it. Okay? So the first time through, token equals this, and rest of line equals this. Okay? Because I used fgetL, I'm not using the carriage return. Rest of line gets this. So that's what's returned here. Okay? So I print this token, right? And then I go back up to the top and I check to see if line is empty. So now line gets reassigned from this whole thing equaling line to just this part here equaling line, right? Now we start again. We do an str token on these remaining 3, and what happens is the first one, because now the computer has ignored that one, the first one now that's the token, and this is the rest of line. So we print that out, we go back to the top, check this to see if it's empty, it's not, then line comes down here and we do an str token on this one here. Right, now that one's gone. And then, so this is the first one, this becomes token, and now line is just this one here, right? So now token is printed, and you go back up to the top, line is not empty. So you do str token on line. What's left, the first thing on the line is this. That's the token. And then what's left is now empty. Is now an empty line because there's nothing left. You print out this token. You go back up to the top. There's nothing there. This fails. The is empty fails. You exit this loop, right? And then you go back to doing what we did in the previous video. You get the next line. This pointer now moves down one. You get the next line, go back up to the top. It's still of type char because you haven't gotten to the -1 at the end here. You go up down into this inner loop, and you start all over with line, getting, going down this line and getting all of its tokens and printing them out, right? You do that, and then that's empty. So you come out of this loop. Once that gets empty, fall out of the loop, come here. Line gets this, and so you get the next line, and your pointer moves down one more, and you keep doing this. And this is how nested loops work. One loop, the outer loop, is concerned with going down this way, and I should do that in black to be correct here. The outer loop's going that way, and the inner loop, the while is empty, the purple loop is moving. The purple loop is moving down each line. So this gets the next line, the purple loop moves down that line. Then you go down one more, the purple loop moves down that line. Then the black loop gets you the next line, and the purple loop goes down the next line. And the black loop gets you the next line, and the purple loop goes down the tokens in that line. And you keep doing that until you're out of lines to do it. And so that's what's happening in this nested loop. And this happens a lot, especially when you deal with images. You'll go down rows of pixels and then across columns. So you'll go to the first row of a pixel, go across the column. Go to the next row of the pixel, go across the column, and so on and so forth. And so you'll see that over and over again. So this is a good place to introduce nested loops. So let's go back and see how this works here in MATLAB with our file. So what we're going to do here, same text in our file. So we're going to do a file open on line 29. Line gets the first line on line 30. So we get our file handle as 5. Line gets it matters not how straight the gate. So our tokens are it matters not how straight the, and then gate with the comma on the back on the end of it. So our outer loop gets us that line, or excuse me, line 30 gets us that first line. We check it is a line. I mean it is a type char, so we're good. Now we go in to our inner loop on line 32. And now string to str token executes on line 33. Okay? So you get the string. Now you look here, token equals it, and line now equals matters not how straight the gate. Okay? So now the first thing has been taken off and it's been assigned a token, and then the second, the rest of the line has been reassigned to variable line. Okay? You print that out. And now if you look down the command window, it's printed. And notice I put a backslash here, so each token is going to print out on its own separate line. Right? And so I go back up to 32. I check to see if line is empty. Line is not empty. It still has plenty of stuff in it. And so I do str token again on line, or str token again on line 33. Now you see that the token is matters, and line now equals not how straight the gate. So it's almost like line 33 is eating away at each line, taking the first thing off. And that's exactly what's going on. And so then I print that on its own line. I go back up to 32. I'm not empty. And so now I do the str token again on line 33. And now it took the not off the front end, and now how straight the gate is left. Okay, so now I'm just going to click through this a few more times so you can see how each time through, line gets shorter, and you're taking each token off, and each token is getting printed. So now we're at gate. And so now, if you look now, line is the empty string, and the token is gate. So now what's going to happen when I come back up to the top of my loop and on line 32 check to see, is line empty? Yes, it is. Line is empty. Line just says while not is empty, or while it is not empty, you did the loop. But as soon as it's empty, right, then this becomes true and not true is false. So you fall out of this loop. And now you go to line 36 because you fall out of the inner loop from line 32 to 35. But on line 36, you get the next line in the file. So this is the outer loop working now. The while that's on 31. Now the outer loop is working, and now that takes you to end. And notice now line on line 36 gets the next line in the file. How charged with punishment to scroll on line 2 of the file. And so now when I go back up, I check to see if it's char. In the outer loop, it is. So then I go back to the inner loop and start all over. And now I start pulling things off of this line. Okay? And then now line is the empty vector. Excuse me, is the empty string. So I get out of the inner loop. I reassign line here on 36 to equal the next line. I am the master of my fate. I go to the top. It's type char. So then I go to line 32 to check if it's empty. It's not. And then I eat away at that one and print that one out. Now line is empty. And so I fall out of this loop. I get the next line on line 36. I go back up to the top. It is of type char. And it's not empty, so I eat away in the inner loop. Now it's empty again. So I fall out of the inner loop, get the next line on line 36, William Ernest Henley. I go back to the top, that is of type char, and now my inner loop goes to work on that. Eats away at it, line is now empty. And so I fall out of the inner loop, I get the next line, but that's value is -1, so I fall out of the outer loop, close the file, and I'm done. And my output is all the tokens. You can see as I scroll through here, all the tokens put on their own line. And you can see some tokens like gate has a comma because it was in the line. Scroll has a period at the end of it. So this is why we don't call them words. This is why we call them tokens. Fate has a colon at the end of it. The punctuations get included. And so you have to go back and do some additional processing if you just want to strip all the words out of it. But you know how to do that with the ASCII code conversions. And so this is very detailed, but mastery of this particular piece of code and understanding this is a very good understanding of fundamental tool, this nested looping that will be very beneficial as you go forward with MATLAB or any programming language. So once again, fopen, fgetl, doing the is_char, doing the is_empty, and then the string token is sort of the gist of the crux of this whole thing, that you have to understand how that works in order to get this. So next up, we'll talk about how you write to text files. So now we're going to talk about writing to text files, which is a lot simpler than reading from text files. So we're going to do writing to text files, okay? And so the way we're going to do it is basically what you do is you still do your fopen and you give it a file name, but now you're writing to, and we usually call them .text files. You can call them other things, but you give it a W here at the end, which tells MATLAB that you're going to write to this file handle, okay? And the one intricacy here is you have to look very closely. The way you write to a file looks a lot like how you write to the command window. You do fprintf, but instead of leaving this blank, you put fh here, and what that says is write to this file handle. Okay? If you don't put anything here, it defaults to the command window. If you put something there, it writes to that file handle, and then you tell it what you want to write, whatever text you want to write in here. Okay? And then what you do is, like you always do, is you close it. And that's it. That's how simple it is. The only other thing that you have to note is that if you open a file for writing, and it's going to do just as we did when we read it, the pointer starts at the top. And so if you open a file for writing, if you have any text in there, it is going to overwrite it. And the other thing is that the file doesn't exist, it will be created. Okay? So if you open a file for writing, if it doesn't exist, it will be created. If it does exist, anything in there is going to get overwritten. All right? This is why you have the append And let me just illustrate that now. Instead of putting a W in here, if you want to append text, you put an A in here. And everything else looks the same. You just put an A in there. And then I put an A in there, and then if there were text already in there, now when I open the file pointer is going to start down here, and now whatever you write, the new text that you write in there, indicate that with purple, will now be appended to the file and not overwritten. So let's show us a couple examples of that here in MATLAB. So I have this file, I have this small script here, and let's just follow it through. On line 5, I'm going to open it. I'm going to call this hello.txt, and I'm going to open it for writing here with the W. And then I'm doing fprintf to that file handle, and I'm going to write in there hola mundo, and then I'm going to put a carriage return in there. Okay, and so maybe I should have called this file hola.txt, but it is hello.txt. In fact, I can change that. Let's do that. There we go. And so now I'm going to open this file hola.txt for writing, and I'm going to write to that file handle. This is the change here, and you have to note that, because if I don't put that there, it's going to write to the command in the window below and not the file handle. And then I do hola mundo with the carriage return, so it'll be on its own line, and then I close it. It's just that simple. So now when I execute this, watch here, notice the file hola.txt does not exist. And so when I execute this, now hola.txt does. And so if I open hola.txt, there it is, hola mundo. And so I'm going to do the split screen here. And so there we go. Now, if I come down here, I'm going to comment this out. And then I'm going to uncomment this. And let me change this here. Now I'm going to open hola.txt again for writing, and this time I'm going to write in this string here, and this is a combination of characters, of ASCII code characters and just text I have, and so we'll see what that says once I print it out, once I write it to the file. But this is going to overwrite. This is an example of overwriting. Because I'm not appending, the file pointer is going to start at line 1 and start writing, and it's going to overwrite what I already have there. And so when I do that, then I'm going to close the file on line 12. So if I do this, if I execute this, and then click on this file, it says como estás, because that's what this does. These are the characters for the inverted question mark, and for the properly accented O and A here. And so so you get this. This is using the extended ASCII character set. And so, but notice I overwrote what was already there because I did W. Now, if I wanted to append, then let me change the file name again here. So now if I wanted to add to that and not and not overwrite it, then I execute it again here. And if I click on the file, now I get Yo estoy bien y tú. And so notice that has been added to line 2. And so this is how you write to a file and append to a file. So this is an example of file I/O. And it's I guess a semi-practical example of a file. The idea here is that maybe you have some event, and at the front of some events they have podiums that sit up there, and on the podium they have spread out some kind of guest book for people to sign as they come in. And so when the guests come in, they sign this book. And so the idea is that they will sign this book and leave comments for the host or hostess. And as they do that, this gets collected in a file that you can give the host and hostess at some point. So to have the name and then a comment, then name, comment, name, and then comment, and so on. So that's what this code does. And then when at the end of the event, when you want to quit this, in the message you enter a Q, and then that will quit the function, quit the script from running. And so let's look at this in MATLAB here. Um, so what we do here on line 5 is we open the guest book. We open a file called guestbook.txt, and notice it doesn't exist over here in our current folder yet, but it will once we open and write to it. We're going to use append, because that way when guest number 2 comes in, they're not overwriting what guest number 1 wrote or typed in. And so we'll append, and you can append to an empty file. That just means you will accumulate everything that you put in that file. And then to control our while loop, we're going to say some variable OK equals true. And that's going to be true until you go down here line 13. I'll jump over a little bit. Every time we come through, we're going to check to see the message that the user left on line 13. And if that message is equal to Q, then OK is going to equal false, which is going to cause this loop to terminate. So we've set up our while loop so that it will end at some point in time. This is a lot like the ATM example we did earlier, we talked about in class. So here on line 8, we ask the user to enter their name. We use the comma string S over here in the input, so they don't have to worry about putting the quotation marks around their name. It's going to assume that everything gets as a string. It's going to assign that to variable name, and then we ask them to enter any message they would like. Once again, we put the string, we put the S character over here, so this is a string, and we put that in variable MSG. And then we print a little, we print out, and once again here, we print out to the file handle that we got on line 5 when we opened up the guestbook.txt, and then we put in a string here. The name says colon. We're going to put a new line here, a tab over the string, and then a new line. So a little formatting in here so that it looks sort of decent when we get the text file. And then we're going to put in name and message into that. So that's fprintf like we've used before. I've explained line 13 through 15. That's how we check to get out of our while loop. And then I clear the screen every time here on line 16 just so it looks better. And so when somebody does enter a Q as the message, then we exit the loop and then we close the file. So relatively simple. So let's execute this so we can see it sort of in action. So we'll do Bart. And then he'll say something like eat shorts. So that one's in. Then we'll do Stewie. And I don't know. We'll do something like MU to hell. These aren't really guests. I guess you want at your party. We'll do Lucy, and she'll put in there loser. We'll do SpongeBob, and I don't know where. There's Gary, and then we'll quit, because with this group of guests, who would want to keep on going? And so now the script ends, and then now if you go over here and you open up the guest book, you'll see there it is. Bart says, eat my shorts. Stewie says, da da da. And it even recorded the cue stuff too. So very, slightly practical use of this reading a string and writing to a string and that kind of thing, or writing to a text file and that kind of thing.